how to coach toughness in athletes. We like to do two things. We have a theme. We always say, hey, choose toughness. You have to choose. It's a choice, right? It's not something that's just developed. It's like a light switch. Are you going to lay down and let people rub your face in the mat, or are you not? It's just that simple, right? So you want to choose being tough. But sometimes it's better to also refuse weakness. So we like to tell our athletes, I think some kids respond better. So it's from a coaching standpoint, I have hundreds of athletes in our academy, and we'll have, 400 or 500 come through our camps, probably 1,000, 1,500 at our private team camps where we travel the nation all summer. And you do those year round though, actually. So there's thousands of kids we're talking to a year, and now through YouTube and so forth, and our social media, we have like 50,000 followers who follow, because we don't just post stupid memes and waste of time stuff. It's actually advice and career-changing advice and tips and so forth. So you might want to follow us. Instagram at Purler Wrestling, Twitter at Nick Purler, and Facebook at Purler Wrestling Inc. Anyway, but when you're dealing with a lot of kids, we just coach both. Choose toughness, and then sometimes we'll say, hey, you have to refuse being weakness. You just have to refuse. I refuse to fall apart when the ref makes a bad call. I refuse to break mentally when I thought I was on weight, but I'm still a half over. I refuse. And we talk about these things all the time in practice, right? And if I see a kid choosing toughness and fighting off weakness and showing confident body language, I point that out. I'm like, hey, so-and-so this weekend, ref made a bad call, all right? You rolled through, you're down 4-0, he came back and won. And I applaud that, right? Because they're going to be able to relate to a professional athlete or to a college wrestling star. They will, but they'll relate a lot more to a fellow 15-year-old or a 16-year-old or a teammate who's 9, right? Who's their age, a peer. And you're like, see, that's what we want in this room, right, guys? Huh? We want to fight off weakness. We never want to show weakness. So number one on my list would be talk about choosing toughness and the importance of how it's a choice. It's not something that's going to happen over time. Be patient, No, I'm not patient. I'm not saying I'm going to win every match forever, but I'm not going to let people. My dad used to say, it's okay to get beat, but don't ever let anyone beat you up, right? That's choosing toughness, right? And that's also saying, I refuse to let anybody, my dad used to call it a whipping boy. You better refuse to let anybody, if you're losing a match, you don't let your body language change. Refuse to let anybody turn you into a wilting man on the mat, right? So choosing toughness, talk about that. Also talk about refusing to show weakness. There's a good saying by Malcolm X. He says, that which you do not hate, you will eventually tolerate, right? We have a good saying in our gym, what you allow us will continue. So much of it is just not allowing certain things, right? So another thing, show demonstrations of toughness. We just talked about that, right? Show demonstrations of that. I heard of Dan Gable used to sit his new recruits into the wrestling room, and they would put a videotape in of people not competing. Then they put a videotape in of people competing and say, that's how we wrestle here. You wrestle that way, you won't have the Iowa Hawkeye singlet. He's showing them dramatic demonstrations of proof, which is something we're huge with. And if you've been to our camps, we're like the sports psychology, performance coaching every practice, right? It's just it's part of the drilling, right? Everything is just, that's the reason we had over 3,000 state medalists through our academy. Because our kids, they just win. Because it's an expectation without an over-crushing level of pressure. They want to win. And I give them permission to take the parking brake off, right? So these are some tips and things how I do that. Oh, and then thirdly, I would write down my best self. There's a good exercise, and this is really common, if you study like anything online, right? Or success. How do you want to be known as an athlete? That's what we like to do. We send these self-evaluation forms, self-awareness forms. How do you want to be known as an athlete? Write some things down. Do you want to be known as a kid who wilts when the ref makes a bad call? Or you want to be known as someone who mans up and scores and doesn't let it bother them? Do you want to be known as someone who cries on the mat after you lose? Or do you want to be known as someone who's a fighter, who gets up and shakes hands and say, nice job, and then puts a target on that kid's back and comes back 2 weeks later and beats them? Do you want to be known as someone who lays on their forehead for the third period, or someone who stands up 12 times? Even though you might be losing by 7 points and one escape isn't really going to win you the match, but it does matter, right? You want to be known like that. So you can get your team through these guided exercises, or give them a piece of paper and say, how do you want to be known as an athlete all over America? You know, that's a very important exercise. And so now they are basically writing this down, you know, how I want to be known as an athlete. And once they write it down, and now they're starting to, you know, it's like these, they're making these connections, right? And these commitments. And then maybe revisit that every once in a while. When they do well, say, hey, you know what? You said you want to be known as an athlete who's a competitor. You did that today. I'm proud of you. Even if they got 5th place, as long as they were competing, I mean, be proud of them. I'm proud of the way you walked on the mat. I'm proud of the way you took the loss. I'm proud of the way you came back from behind and got a takedown and sent the match in overtime and got another takedown. I'm proud of all of these things. Then when you see kids do this online, or, you know, you watch wrestling on the internet and so forth, point these out. Okay, so there's my thoughts on developing tougher athletes. Check us out at purlerwrestling.com.